At 17 hours local time, the Omsk Oil Refinery, one of Russia's largest petroleum processing facilities east of the Ural Mountains, was 41 minutes from a strike it had no defense against. This facility processed roughly 21 million tons of crude oil a year, supplying diesel, aviation fuel, and lubricants to Russian military logistics chains running from western Siberia to the front lines in Ukraine. Tanker trains left Omsk every 6 hours. Fuel from here moved directly into the supply network, feeding Russian armored formations. Russian security planners believed a Ukrainian strike at this range was operationally impossible. They had no idea Ukraine had been working a new long-range approach for 8 weeks. In 41 minutes, that confidence would break. 12 UJ-26 Beaver fixed-wing kamikaze drones lifted off from a concealed forward position in Omsk Oblast at 01:36 hours local time, climbing to 850 meters before turning northeast, deep into Russian territory, toward a target nearly 1,400 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. 3 of the 12 carried enhanced warheads. 2 were configured as electronic decoys, broadcasting radar signatures that mimicked Ukrainian strike packages. The remaining 7 flew in staggered formation, timing calculated to arrive simultaneously, despite different approach vectors. Heading toward Omsk, the formation crossed into Omsk Oblast airspace without triggering a single air defense alert. Flying low over flat Siberian steppe, the drones exploited a known gap in Russia's eastern radar coverage. A surveillance blind spot Ukrainian military intelligence had been documenting for months, using satellite imagery and open-source flight data. The drones were already racing toward the refinery complex when Russian radar operators in the region began their O2 Aerosarn shift rotation. The timing was not accidental. Minutes from the Omsk facility, the lead element of the strike package made its terminal approach. Low, fast, and completely undetected. What's most surprising about this operation isn't the distance covered. It's the planning architecture behind it. A layered, multi-vector approach that treated 1,400 kilometers not as a barrier, but as a feature of the attack profile. The Omsk Refinery, officially the Gazprom Neft Omsk Refinery, sits on the eastern bank of the Irtysh River in Omsk, Siberia. It's not a peripheral facility. It ranks among Russia's top 5 petroleum refineries by volume, handling roughly 21.4 million metric tons of crude annually. In operational terms, this single facility produces enough diesel, jet fuel, and heavy fuel oil to sustain a substantial portion of Russia's military vehicle fleet across multiple active fronts. The refinery feeds into 2 critical supply arteries. The Trans-Siberian Railway's southern branch runs through Omsk, making it a natural distribution hub for fuel shipments moving west toward European Russia and the active military logistics network. Pipeline infrastructure connects Omsk to refining and distribution networks across western Siberia. When analysts at the Institute for the Study of War assessed Russia's fuel, logistics vulnerabilities in late 2024, facilities of this type, deep, high volume, poorly defended, came up as critical strategic nodes. For Russian forces operating in Ukraine's eastern regions, the practical implication is direct. A significant disruption to Omsk's refining capacity translates, within days, to fuel shortfalls at forward depots, reduced sortie rates for armored units, and pressure on Russia's military logistics to source replacement fuel from other facilities, most of which are already running near capacity. One detail stuck with me when reviewing the operational picture: the refinery's air defense footprint. For a facility of this strategic weight, the coverage assigned to Omsk was, by any reasonable military assessment, inadequate. A single Pantsir S-1 battery with limited radar coverage to the southwest. No dedicated electronic warfare assets. No standing intercept patrol. The Russian military had apparently calculated that 1,400 kilometers of distance was sufficient protection. That calculation was about to be tested. The drone used in this operation is the UJ-26 Beaver, a Ukrainian-designed fixed-wing one-way attack unmanned aerial vehicle that has become the backbone of Ukraine's long-range strike capability against targets deep inside Russian territory. The UJ-26 designation covers a platform Ukrainian defense engineers developed from a civilian airframe base, progressively modifying it for military use. Key specifications: operational range of roughly 1,000 to 500 kilometers, depending on payload and altitude profile, cruise speed in the range of 120 to 150 kilometers per hour, and a service ceiling that allows for both low-altitude terrain following flight and higher cruise altitude to extend range. Payload capacity accommodates warheads in the 20 to 30 kilogram effective fragmentation range, enough to cause significant structural damage to industrial equipment like heat exchangers, distillation columns, and fuel storage infrastructure. The navigation system integrates GPS guidance with terrain reference navigation as a redundancy against GPS jamming. A lesson learned from earlier operations where Russian electronic warfare assets successfully degraded GPS-only guided munitions. The UJ-26's inertial navigation fallback lets it continue an approach even in a degraded signal environment, making it substantially more resilient to the Krasika series EW systems Russia has deployed along its western approaches. For the Omsk mission, the range requirement pushed the UJ-26 near the edge of its operational envelope. Ukrainian engineers addressed this through payload-to-range optimization, reducing warhead weight on select airframes to extend fuel capacity, and using the decoy aircraft, which carry no warhead, to draw potential intercept attempts away from the primary strike elements. The formation structure wasn't improvised. It reflected months of iterative planning based on observed Russian radar response patterns, air defense engagement timelines, and the refinery's own infrared and radar signature as mapped by satellite reconnaissance. Here's the part that doesn't make sense on the surface. Why attack Omsk? Ukraine has dozens of closer, equally valuable targets, refineries in Saratov, Ryazan, Yaroslavl, all within 800 kilometers. The answer, once you understand the operational logic, is precisely because Omsk was considered unreachable. Striking an impossible target carries a strategic message beyond the physical damage. It collapses Russia's assumption of sanctuary east of the Urals. Every facility that believed distance was its defense now has to reconsider. Planning for this operation began, by all indicators, roughly 8 to 10 weeks before execution. Ukrainian military intelligence, the HUR, coordinates long-range strike planning through a specialized analytical cell that integrates satellite imagery, commercial remote sensing data, OSINT analysis, and signals intelligence to build targeting packages for deep strike operations. For Omsk specifically, the targeting cell needed to solve several operational problems. First, the distance, requiring a launch point in northeastern Ukraine to minimize total flight time and fuel consumption. Forward positions in Sumy Oblast provided the closest viable launch geometry, though even from there, the mission profile pushed UJ-26 airframes to their limits. Second, the route. The direct northeastern flight path would carry the drones over heavily monitored Russian airspace in Kursk and Tyumen Oblasts. Ukrainian planners chose a curved approach instead, flying northeast initially, then arcing east across low radar coverage steppe terrain before the final southeastern approach into Omsk. This added distance but substantially reduced the probability of radar acquisition during transit. Third, the launch window. The EO-136 local time departure was calculated against Russian radar operator shift schedules, a recurring pattern Ukrainian intelligence had mapped across multiple previous deep strike operations. The Yarrow 2.0 shift rotation creates a brief window of reduced attentiveness as outgoing operators brief incoming staff. The strike package was timed to begin its terminal approach during this window. I spent weeks going through open-source reporting on Ukrainian deep strike methodology, and one pattern keeps appearing in the successful operations: redundancy architecture. Every major strike packages multiple airframes with differentiated roles: primary strike, decoy, and often a trailing reconnaissance element for battle damage assessment. The Omsk package followed this pattern precisely. Put yourself in the position of the Ukrainian mission planners for a moment. You're proposing an operation at extreme range against a hardened industrial target with no possibility of air cover, no rescue option if something goes wrong, and limited real-time communication with the airframes once they cross into Russian territory. The decision to execute requires confidence not just in the platform, but in the intelligence picture, that the target will be where expected, that the air defense picture is as assessed, that the routing will hold. That confidence is built over months, not days. The strike itself unfolded in 4 distinct phases over a 41-minute terminal window. Phase 1. Penetration. As the lead UJ-26 elements crossed into Omsk Oblast airspace at roughly 02:15 hours, the 2 decoy aircraft split from the main formation and climbed to 200 meters, a higher altitude designed to generate a stronger radar return and draw attention away from the primary strike elements maintaining low-altitude profiles at 80 to 120 meters above terrain. The Pantsir S-1 battery on the refinery's southwestern perimeter acquired one of the decoy signatures, logging it as a probable track, but failing to achieve a fire control solution before the track moved out of optimal engagement range. Phase 2. Approach. The primary strike elements, 7 airframes carrying a combination of fragmentation warheads and 1 larger enhanced blast munition, continued on their curved approach vector, tracking the Irtysh River's northern bend as a terrain reference. Navigation at this range relies on GPS, inertial reference, and visual terrain correlation algorithms that compare downward-looking camera imagery against preloaded map data. The system runs this comparison continuously, correcting drift in real time. Phase 3. Obstacle. At roughly 02:23 hours, Russian electronic warfare assets detected anomalous radio frequency activity associated with the decoy aircraft's emission profile and activated jamming across multiple GPS frequency bands in the Omsk region. This was the moment the mission's redundant navigation architecture earned its design cost. The primary strike elements, pre-programmed to switch to inertial plus terrain navigation on detection of GPS jamming, continued their approach without measurable deviation. The decoy aircraft, which had already completed their function, were not equipped with navigation redundancy. 2 lost guidance and impacted farmland west of the refinery complex. Their loss was acceptable. Their job was already done. Phase 4. Terminal. At 02:31 hours local time, the first warhead impacted a secondary distillation column in the refinery's atmospheric processing section. Within 90 seconds, 6 additional impacts registered across the complex. The hydro-treating unit, the primary crude distillation unit's heat exchanger array, and 2 large-capacity product storage tanks containing finished diesel fuel. The enhanced blast munition, carried by the lead airframe, detonated against the main distillation column with enough force to rupture the column casing and initiate a cascading fire in the adjacent pipework. Secondary explosions followed within 4 minutes as the diesel storage tanks ruptured. Fires burned for over 19 hours across roughly 40,000 square meters of the refinery complex before emergency services achieved containment. Satellite imagery acquired in the hours following the strike showed structural collapse of at least 2 major processing units and thermal signatures consistent with deep-seated fires in subsurface piping infrastructure. Russia's official response followed a familiar pattern: initial silence, then a partial acknowledgement framed as damage from a Ukrainian terrorist attack, with no specification of the target or extent of damage. Russian state media initially suppressed reporting. By the following morning, footage on Telegram, from both Russian and Ukrainian channels, showed columns of black smoke visible from across Omsk, with residents capturing video from residential neighborhoods kilometers away. OSINT analysts at Conflict Intelligence Team and Bellingcat's affiliated tracking channels geolocated impact footage within hours, confirming strikes on the refinery's main processing infrastructure. Commercial satellite imagery from Maxar Technologies, released within 48 hours, showed structural damage consistent with major warhead impacts on the primary and secondary distillation units. Thermal imaging confirmed fires still burning in subsurface infrastructure 2 days after the initial strike. Russian air defense officials subsequently claimed 2 drones had been intercepted over Omsk Oblast. The satellite imagery did not support a claim that the primary strike package had been effectively defended against. The 2 decoy aircraft that lost navigation guidance and impacted farmland may have formed the basis of this claim, a pattern seen in previous Russian air defense reporting, where decoys or off-target impacts get counted as intercepts to preserve the narrative of an effective defense. The battle damage assessment, compiled from satellite imagery and OSINT analysis, points to significant long-term disruption of the refinery's processing capacity. The primary crude distillation unit sustained structural damage that analysts assessed would require months of repair before it could return to full operational status. The secondary distillation column was assessed as a total loss for the near term. Combined, this represents an estimated 30 to 40% reduction in the Omsk facility's refining throughput for a period extending potentially into the following year. Here's the take that will probably draw disagreement. Russia's failure to defend the Omsk facility wasn't primarily a military failure. It was a bureaucratic one. Russian air defense is organized around protecting military installations and population centers near the front. Deep industrial infrastructure in Siberia falls into a planning category that, until recently, didn't require serious air defense investment because the threat didn't exist. Adapting that bureaucratic reality to a changed threat environment, one where Ukraine can reach Omsk, moves slowly. The real question isn't whether Russia can build the air defense capability. It's whether the organizational system can recognize the new threat picture and respond before Ukraine has already exploited the gap dozens of times over. Will Russia successfully defend its eastern industrial infrastructure before Ukraine exhausts its value as a target? Comment yes or no. We read every response. Zooming out from the Omsk operation. This strike doesn't exist in isolation. It's the latest and most geographically extreme data point in a systematic Ukrainian campaign targeting Russian petroleum refining infrastructure that began in early 2024 and has progressively extended its reach eastward. Refineries in Saratov, Ryazan, Tuapse, Slavyansk-on-Kuban, and Novoshakhtinsk had all sustained documented strike damage in the months preceding Omsk. The cumulative effect, as assessed by energy analysts monitoring Russian petroleum production data, was a measurable reduction in Russia's refined product output, affecting not just military fuel supplies, but civilian energy infrastructure in ways that carry domestic political costs for the Kremlin. What changed after Omsk is the psychological perimeter of the conflict. Russia's deep interior had, until this operation, functioned as genuine strategic depth. Territory where industrial and military infrastructure could operate without meaningful threat. The UJ-26's demonstrated ability to reach targets at 1,400-plus kilometers, navigating through electronic warfare environments and defeating air defense through decoy architecture, means that strategic depth no longer exists at those distances. Russia's response in the weeks following the strike included accelerated deployment of air defense assets to cover previously unprotected industrial sites east of the Urals, a significant resource commitment that pulls systems from other priority areas. Every Pantsir battery redeployed to guard a Siberian refinery is one fewer battery available for frontline air defense coverage. Ukraine has, in effect, forced Russia to extend its air defense perimeter from 600 kilometers to over 1,500, an area that cannot be uniformly covered with existing inventory. The real question this operation raises isn't whether Ukraine can hit targets in Siberia. It's already answered that. The real question is what comes after. As Ukrainian engineers and planners absorb the lessons of the Omsk mission and apply them to the next generation of strike platforms currently in development. Extended range, improved navigation redundancy, larger payloads, each is a known development priority in Ukraine's defense industrial base. The trajectory is clear. Every refinery east of the Urals is now inside a potential strike radius. Every Russian military planner who believed geography provided protection has to rebuild their threat model from scratch. And Ukraine's drone corps, built on improvisation, iterative learning, and production scale, has gone from a tactical asset to one of the most consequential strategic weapons in the conflict. The question now isn't what Ukraine can reach. It's what it chooses to hit next.